The numbers are staggering. More than 300,000 farmers have taken their own lives in India over the past 20 years. That's about one suicide every 30 minutes, nearly 12,400 alone in 2014. Agriculture is the country's largest employment sector, yet farmers find themselves stuck in a vicious cycle of debt and poverty, brought on in part by long droughts, poor yields and unseasonal rains. Many simply just give up. Later, we'll talk with several experts about what some are calling a deadly epidemic. But first, CCTV's Shweta Bajaj travelled to the Indian state of Maharashtra, where more farmers committed suicide last year than any other state in the country.
Nearly 2 years ago, 23-year-old Kalidas, a farmer from one of the regions hardest hit by drought, committed suicide. Under the new insurance program, farmers paying premiums amounting to around 1.5% of a crop's value can receive full value if destroyed by drought or flood. The aim is to stop farmers like Kalidas from ending their lives. He borrowed $6,000 to install a pipe to irrigate the family farm, but drought had left no water to pipe in. It wasn't just crop failure that drove Kalidas to suicide. His father says it was the bank payments.
My son took a loan. When the debt became too big to pay, the bank officials started coming to our house. He was so stressed that he didn't think and committed suicide.
In the state of Maharashtra, in a region called Marathwada, the situation is especially grim. There has been a sharp increase in farmer suicides in the region of Marathwada in the year 2016. They have gone up by a massive 85%. The reason is a combination of no rain and depletion of groundwaters, which is pushing farmers to the edge. More than 3,300 Maharashtra farmers committed suicide in 2015. In the first 2 months of this year, another 57 farmers took their lives. After 3 years, the drought in Maharashtra is grave, with barely any groundwater left. Rajabhav Deshmukh, a Maharashtra farmer, says suicide rate is climbing. He blames the drought and poor education.
When we studied why these suicides were happening, we realized that the number of small farmers that have small pieces of land is very large. They are uneducated and have no idea about the national economy. From the early 2000s, water has been a massive problem. Sometimes there's no rain and sometimes there's excessive rain, which destroys the crops. A farmer's economic condition is so bad that he has no will to live and kills himself.
The region has struggled with this issue for decades, but it's receiving attention only now. In 1998, Yamna's husband committed suicide when she was 2.5 months pregnant with their second child. After she gave birth to her second daughter, who is deaf and mute, her husband's family asked her to leave their house and fend for herself. For them, 2 granddaughters meant more mouths to feed and a dowry for their weddings. Yamna has been working in the fields to survive. The first few years were a nightmare, with banks asking her to pay her husband's debt.
Money collectors from the bank used to repeatedly trouble us, but we didn't have money for food. Local moneylenders also troubled us, and the interest kept going up. Now we just barely managed to make ends meet.
India's new crop failure insurance was supposed to be available this month, the beginning of a new planting season. The question is whether it will help farmers already deep in debt and with no money to buy seed. Shweta Bajaj, CCTV, in Maharashtra state, India.
Joining us via Skype from Chandigarh in India is journalist and food policy analyst Devinder Sharma. And with us from New Delhi is Shamika Ravi. She focuses on development economics as a fellow with the Brookings Institution and is currently a visiting professor at the Indian School of Business. Thanks to both of you for joining us. Shamika, let me start with you. When we look at the number of farmers who are killing themselves in India, it's reached crisis proportions right now. They number in the thousands. Why are so many farmers resorting to suicide? Is there no kind of safety net? And is it just hopelessness that drives them to this?
Well, if we look at the data, Anand, over the last 30 years, the trend is showing that over the last 6 to 7 years, there is a downward decline. So on the whole, though the numbers are still very significant, they seem to show a decline. So on the whole, maybe things are improving a little bit. But again, if you look at the overall, the NCRB data, then it seems to suggest that poor health, mental and physical health, is one of the most, commonly cited reasons in as many as 20% of all the suicides that are being reported. So it goes beyond agrarian distress. It's broader set of conditions.
So, Devinder, we hear that, a number of these farmers are killing themselves because of what Shamika just mentioned, mental health, depression, things like this. But we also hear that one of the root causes that are causing farmers to kill themselves is money. They get themselves into this cycle of debt. They can't get out of it. They see no way out. The only way out is to kill themselves.
Well, I think, first of all, let's be very clear that as far as we understand, the number of people committing suicide is actually not coming down. The government would like to play it down because they want to show as if things are improving. But what they have done in the formal data that they provide us is they have split the farmers category into two, which means the land-owning farmers and the landless farmers. So it gives an impression as if the number is coming down, but very cleverly it has been hidden. Having said that, my understanding of the entire thing is that yes, it is the mounting debt, or they are not able to get out of the trap, which is laid out by indebtedness. But primarily it is because Indian farmers are paid very, very less. They are deliberately being paid less. They are not being given the proper income. And that is the reason they have no other option but to take more credit, and which compounds the crisis. Unfortunately, this is part of a global design which is actually aimed at pushing farmers out of agriculture. So what is happening in India has happened earlier in America. They pushed farmers out of agriculture, and they provide huge subsidies to sustain those who are still in agriculture. But in India, the incomes are pathetically very, very low, as a result of which the farmers are left with little choice.
Right, Shamika, is that the problem? Farmers do not get enough money, so they go to these lenders where they borrow money and then they're charged exorbitant rates of interest.
Yes, I mean, it would be nice to blame it all on the existing, hypothesis, which I think largely Indian media has clung on for now, 60 years. But you need to look at the data more categorically. First of all, in fact, I highly recommend that you read a report that came out of Brookings as early as, October last year, which looks at the disaggregates across different states. And if you compare states where the agrarian distress is actually quite severe, namely Bihar and UP, the suicide mortality rate of farmers in these states is much, much lower than the relatively better states of Maharashtra and Telangana. So, this theory of farmers on the whole being paid less, I think these are very simplistic, and they actually, what they do is they crowd away, attention away from some of the more important policy recommendations that the data is really pointing us towards. Now, another thing to note is that what Devender pointed out, if you look at the trend over the last 15, 20 years is what I'm talking about. So it is not what the government did in the last few years that I'm talking about. The overall trend over the last 25 years shows that farmer suicides are declining. So that's the broader context within which we must appreciate this problem. But again, health becomes, it's across mental and physical as an overriding factor. But then we have to go beyond. If you look at even Maharashtra and Telangana, what we see is that this entire phenomenon is really limited in 6 or 7 districts. And if you look at the land ownership across the farmers who are committing suicides, then you will see that it is not the highly indebted farmers. So if you look at incidence of indebtedness or the debt to asset ratio, then you will realize that it's really the poor farmers who are indebted more. And yet the suicides are actually happening amongst farmers who have land ownership of above 2 acres or more. So it's all very simplistic, and I really do want to put this conspiracy theory, which we've been clinging on for a very long time, this has to be put away.
Right, so can you explain that to us? Because the conventional view is that it's the poor farmers, the guys right at the bottom rung of the ladder, who are the ones who are committing suicide. But you're saying it's not the case. It's actually those who do own land, those who do have some kind of assets, they are the ones committing suicide. So how do you explain that then? Why?
Well, and the NCRB data is telling you it is largely health. It's mental and physical health. Now, even if you look at, again, within Maharashtra, where the farmer suicides are much larger than any other states in the country, you will see that if you just map the suicide rate across different land holdings, it's the better off farmers.
Right. Devinder, would you agree that to some extent it is mental health conditions? The fact that people could be suffering from depression, not just that, but they're not being treated for that. Could that be playing a role in this?
You know, the governments also always wants to give an impression when there is a hunger death, you want to say, no, it's not because of hunger, it's because of, you know, you had a problem with your, tuberculosis, or you had other kinds of diseases and ailments and so on and so forth. In the case of farmer suicides also, there has been an effort to really brand it as if it is not because of economic crisis, but it's because of, you know, mental depression and so on and so forth. But let's be very clear. In a state like Punjab, which is the food bowl of the country, which has the highest productivity, even if you look at wheat, the productivity is higher than that of America. And if you look at paddy, it is almost matching that of China. And 98% of what area is irrigated. And yet today, Punjab has become the second most important hotspot for farmer suicides in the country. So I think we need to understand that it's not as simple as that. You know, it's very easy to say why farmers in eastern UP or in Bihar are not committing suicide. That's also linked to the kind of agriculture we have brought in. You know, commercial agriculture, wherever we have been having more of cash crops, there are more suicides happening because the risk is tremendous. And as I said, because there is no income base to fall back upon, obviously he will, whenever he suffers a health consequences, he has to, you know, more or less, I find they go and commit suicide because it's a huge expense. Roughly about 40% of farmers' income goes into addressing the health issues. And what income are we talking about? In India, you'll be surprised, 17 states of India, that's what the economic survey tells us, 17 states of India, the average income of a farming family is just 20,000 rupees per year. Now, this is the average. Now, what do you expect these farmers to do? 20,000 rupees, I think, you know, would be less than 50, or let's say, I don't know, if you convert it into US dollars. But the point I'm trying to make is it's pathetically very low. And I think as long as we don't provide a higher income, I don't see a way out.
Well,
that's what I feel.
right, Devinder, the government is doing something about that. Back in March, they released their federal budget. Shamika, we'll get to you in a moment. The government released its federal budget, and it says that it plans to double the incomes of farmers within the next 6 years. Would that work?
I think that's just to you know, give an impression or an illusion to farmers. I want to know if a man who's earning 20,000 rupees today per year, which means about 1,700 rupees per month, per day, or per month, right. 1,700 rupees. What do you want him to do tomorrow? Okay. How does he survive? I think that's the bigger question. The government does not want to give any money in the hands of farmers. If you look at the minimum support price increase, it is again something very shocking. Only 3 to 5% is the increase in the minimum support price for wheat and rice. And whereas if you look at the salary jumps for employees, the lowest employee in the government now gets a 260% jump in his basic salary. So these are the kinds of distortions that are happening in this country, which are leading to farmers' crisis in India.
All right, let me go to Shamika. Go ahead.
So I agree with Devinder there that the minimum support price should be adjusted according to the inflation and other macro variables. But going back to the previous point, Punjab is one of the richest states, and yet we're seeing suicide rates increase there. But we also know that Punjab has a very severe problem with drug abuse and substance abuse and alcoholism. So it's about time we started taking mental and physical health much more seriously rather than, you know, beating around the same old story of debt. Now, in the past, because we've had this debt narrative catch hold of Indian media for the last, and policy, unfortunately, most of the policy interventions in farmer suicide have been so limited to debt. And we've had so many debt waivers over the last 2 decades, leading to no serious impact in terms of the numbers of farmer suicides. So it's about time we really started looking at the disaggregate data. Now, what Devinder talked about is the average farmer. It's true. Average farmer incomes are very low. But again, the disaggregated data is showing you that the farmer suicides are not happening for the average farmers. It's a relatively better off farmers. And and of course, I'm saying that you need to look at the distribution as a whole. And if the distribution is telling us that it's a better off farmers, it's the wrong intervention. Right. Debt waivers are not going to do anything more than they have done for the last 2.5 decades.
Yeah, Shamika, it still remains a crisis. We've got nearly half of all families in India who depend on agriculture. Farming is the country's largest employer. Do you believe that the Indian government is giving enough attention to this? I mean, on its priority list, where does this feature?
Well, so we need to look at this, Anand, from a couple of points. One is in terms of the labor market itself. Now, agricultural labor Thanks to the NREGS over the last 10 years, we've had a serious upgradation and increase in agriculture labor wages happening all across India. There is enough empirical research to support that has happened. But as far as other support systems, agriculture requires a lot of infrastructure, and it is only in this budget in March that we have really seen this government move its entire focus into strengthening the rural infrastructure. So my sense is, and by the way, these kind of infrastructure investments and programs, there is a gestation lag, so I don't think these, the current announcements of March are going to have any, immediate impact. But I think on the whole, agriculture requires, many more interventions, and which is eventually going to lead to tackling the agrarian crisis. It has to do with infrastructure. It has to do with better insurance, and towards that, I think one of the largest crop insurance programs was announced in the last budget. Of course, as an economist, I mean, I have done some research in crop insurance, and globally we have seen that if the product is a standalone product, and that too subsidized by the government the way it has been announced, standalone crop insurance hasn't succeeded anywhere, Anand, globally. In any of even the financially, advanced economies, crop insurance don't work. So we need to find, because the measurement errors are, very high. So we need to find better instruments. And this is where I have been arguing that crop insurance, which is indexed to something which is easy to measure, like the weather, rainfall, wind speed, temperature, all those different factors that really affect the crop. So we have to have a better product than the one we have announced.
Right, those instruments that you talk about, let me go to Devinder on this. Would the government, or would farmers be better off if the government actually addressed things like, say, the water crisis in India, addressed things like irrigation rather than talk about crop insurance policies?
Well, I would say that both are required. We require crop insurance and at the same time an effective crop insurance, and at the same time we require investments to be made in various things that agriculture requires. There's no denying about it. But the fundamental question, as I've been saying everywhere, is that it's not the farmers who have failed. Actually, it is the economists who have failed the farmers. And it's because they are the ones who have not been suggesting the right remedy for agriculture crisis. The crisis is primarily it is because of income insecurity. It's the income crisis which nobody wants to address. You want to bring it by an indirect mechanism, saying that the crop insurance will boost your income, or your productivity will increase your income, and so on. This argument I've heard again, and as I said earlier, Punjab is a classic example that doesn't work. Now, what exactly is the crisis? The crisis is of income. And I think that is what we don't want to address. Just because, the mainline thinking is that farmers must be moved out, so nobody wants to do anything for agriculture. And then, you want to create employment in these cities, where you make them daily wage workers. And if that is the kind of a development process, I think there are bigger questions that need to be asked. But yes, I feel that, in Europe and America, the farmers are surviving not because they are very productive, but because they're given tremendous income support. That is the reason why they're surviving. If you look at America, the average income of American household in agriculture is about 150% higher than the average in the American households. So if you look at Holland, it is about 250% higher. Now that's because of huge subsidies, huge income support. I'm not saying that that's required or not required, but in India we keep them pauperized deliberately because we don't want to give them income, and that is the fundamental question that whether it's a small farmer, whether it's a big farmer, everyone needs income, and income we are not providing to the farmers. They'll continue to die.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. Shamika Ravi, Devinder Sharma, thanks to both of you for joining us.